A Course in Miracles, the complete and annotated edition. Chapter 1, Section 1, The Principles of Miracles. Miracle Principle number 49. The miracle makes no distinction among degrees of misperception. The miracle is a device for perception correction, which is effective quite apart from either the degree or the direction of the error. And this is the miracle's true indiscriminateness. Higher mind-controlled miracles are selective only in that higher mind-controlled miracles are directed toward those who can use miracles for themselves. Directing miracles toward those who can use those miracles for themselves, that makes it inevitable that these folks will extend miracles to others. And because of this, a very strong chain of healing and correction is welded. But higher mind control takes no account at all of the magnitude of the miracle itself, because the concept of size exists only in a plane that is itself unreal. Since the miracle aims at restoring reality, the miracle would be hardly useful if the miracle were bound by the laws of the same error that the miracle aimed to correct. Only human beings make that kind of error. And that kind of error is an expression of the foolish consistency that our own false beliefs have engendered. Both the power and the strength of your creative will must be understood before the real meaning of denial can be appreciated and abolished. Denial is not mere negation. Denial is a positive miscreation. While the miscreation is necessarily believed in by its own maker, the positive miscreation called denial does not exist at all at the level of true creation. Miracle Principle number 50. The miracle compares what you make with the higher level of creation, accepting what is in accord with it as true and rejecting the discordant as false. All aspects of fear are untrue because all aspects of fear do not exist at the higher creative level and therefore do not exist at all. And so to whatever extent you are willing to submit your beliefs to the real test of validity, to that extent are your perceptions healed, which means corrected. The real test of validity refers to comparing your beliefs to reality, to the higher level of creation. And only when your beliefs are in accord with that higher level are your beliefs truly valid. And so in sorting out the false from the true, the miracle proceeds along these lines. Perfect love casts out fear, which means if fear exists, then there is not perfect love. But only perfect love really exists. Therefore, if there is fear, it's producing a state which does not exist. Believe this, and you will be free. Only God can establish this solution. For this faith, this solution is God's gift. But you must contribute to your readiness here as elsewhere. The readiness for faith, as for everything else that is true, entails the 2 steps necessary for the release from fear. And the 2 steps necessary for the release from fear appears to refer to the 2-step sorting out process given just above. Thus, step 1 would be realizing that your fear has cast perfect love out of your mind, and step 2 would be realizing that since only perfect love is real, the loveless state you are in now must be unreal. Denial of fear, in human terms, is a strong defense because denial of fear entails 2 levels of error. Denial of fear in human terms is a strong defense because denial of fear entails 2 levels of error. The first level of error is this, that truth can be denied, and 2, that absence of truth can be effective. Recognizing fear corrects only the second error. Miracle-mindedness corrects the first error. Recognizing fear corrects the second error, which is that absence of truth can be effective. And miracle-mindedness corrects the first error, that truth can be denied. Some are more miracle-minded and less able to recognize fear, while others are less miracle-minded but better able to recognize fear. However, these differences do not affect the power of the miracle at all, since only the distinction between truth and error is the miracle's concern. Further, when these different types join together, the conditions needed for consistent miracle-mindedness, the state in which fear has been abolished, can be particularly well worked out. The purpose of this course is integration. You cannot use this course right until you have taken the course. You cannot use the course right until you have taken the course. As long as your identification either vacillates or is weak, you cannot accept the gift that belongs to you. You are still either vacillating between recognizing the gift and throwing it away, or regarding yourself as too weak to accept it. You do not yet know the Course in Miracles' healing power. After you have taken the course, you will accept the course, which means you will keep the course and you will use the course. That is the final exam, which you will have no trouble in passing. Midterm marks are not entered in the permanent record. Chapter 2 of A Course in Miracles, the complete and annotated edition. Chapter 2, Right Defense and Release from Fear. Section 1, The Real Meaning of Possession. Editor's note. This first section is a specialized section that appears to be intended mainly for psychologists. This first section says that its focus on mental illness is, quote, less constructive for most people than a course primarily devoted to mental health. However, some professions will find some principles of mental illness constructive. This obviously includes psychologists. The general reader may therefore want to skip this rather complex section and can do so without losing the basis for understanding the sections that follow. If you do skip this section, however, we recommend that you read the final 3 paragraphs. If you do skip this section, however, we recommend that you read the final 3 paragraphs as well as a brief summary of the section that can be found in the first footnote below. The real meaning of possession should be clarified. Fear of possession is a perverted expression of the fear of the irresistible attraction of God. I'm afraid of my irresistible attraction by God, and so now I am afraid of possession. I am afraid of my irresistible attraction to God, and so now I am afraid of being possessed, either by them or the devil or that or this or that. The truth is still that the attraction of God is irresistible at all levels. And the acceptance of this totally unavoidable truth is only a matter of time. But you should consider whether you want to wait, because you can return now if you choose. Possession is a concept which has been subject to numerous distortions, some of which we will list below. Type 1. Possession can be associated with the body only, and if possession is associated only with the body, if this occurs, sex is particularly likely to be contaminated. If the idea of possession is associated with the body only, then sex is particularly likely to be contaminated. Possession versus being possessed is apt to be seen as the male versus the female role. Since neither will be conceived of as satisfying alone, possessing or being possessed, since being possessed or possessing neither will be conceived of as satisfying alone, and both possessing and being possessed will be associated with fear, this interpretation is particularly vulnerable to psychosexual confusion. Psychosexual confusion, that is, psychological confusion about one's sexuality. In this case, this confusion is caused by seeing the male role as possessing and the female role as being possessed. This makes each role in itself both unsatisfying and fearful, and so causes one to gravitate toward the other role as well. Type 2. Type 2 possession. From a rather similar reference point, possession can also be associated with things. This is essentially a shift from type 1 and is usually due to an underlying fear of associating possession with people. In this sense, it is an attempt to protect people from one's possessiveness, like the superstition about, quote, protecting the name that we mentioned before. Both type 1 and type 2 of possession are likely to become compulsive for several reasons, including A. They represent an attempt to escape from the real possession desire, which cannot be satisfied in this way. And B. They set up substitute goals, which are usually reasonably easy to attain. Substitute goals superficially look like the actual goal of the possession drive to be possessed by God and therefore appear to satisfy it. They are usually reasonably easy to attain because finding bodies to possess is something most people manage to do, and finding things to possess is something everyone, to some degree, manages to do. Substitute goals appear to be relatively harmless and thus seem to allay fear. The fact that fantasies usually interfere with good interpersonal relationships can be interpreted in this culture as a lack of sophistication on the part of the other, not the self. And this induces a false feeling of confidence in the solution. It is also fairly easy to find a partner who shares the illusion of possession. Thus, we have any number of relationships which are actually established on the basis of type 1 possession, and other relationships which hold together primarily because of a joint interest in type 2 of possession. The manifestly external emphasis which both entail seem to be a safety device, and thus permits a false escape from much more basic inhibitions. As a compromise solution, the illusion of interpersonal relating is preserved, along with the retention of lack of love. This kind of psychic juggling leaves the juggler with a feeling of emptiness, which in fact is perfectly justified, because that person is acting from scarcity. That person then becomes more and more driven in their behavior to fill the emptiness. When these solutions have been invested with extreme belief, type 1 leads to sex crimes and type 2 to stealing. The kleptomaniac is a good example of this type 2 of possession. And generally, the kleptomaniac is a good example of the latter form of possession. Generally, 3 types of emotional disturbances result. The tendency to maintain the illusion that only the physical is real produces depression. The tendency to maintain the illusion that only the physical is real produces depression. Three types of emotional disturbance results from type 2 of belief in possession, and it is this. The first type of emotional disturbance that results from the second type of possession, which leads to stealing. And the second type of possession is The second type of belief in possession, which leads to stealing, and the kleptomaniac is a good example of this. And generally, three types of emotional disturbances result from the belief in possession, and that is this. Number one, the tendency to maintain the illusion that only the physical is real, and that produces depression. Also, another type of emotional disturbance that comes from the idea and the belief in possession is this: the tendency to invest the physical with non-physical properties. And that is essentially magic and tends more toward anxiety proneness. And the third type of emotional disturbance that results from the belief in possession is the tendency to vacillate from one type of emotional disturbance to another, which produces a corresponding vacillation between depression and anxiety. Type 1 possession can be associated with the body only, and if this occurs, sex is particularly likely to be contaminated. And type 2 possession is more associated with things. This is essentially a shift from type 1 and is usually due to an underlying fear of associating possession with people. All three types of emotional disturbances that result from the belief in possession, the desire for possession and the fear of possession, all three emotional disturbances that result from that result in self-imposed starvation. The belief that you need to possess or that you want to be possessed, the desire to possess or to be possessed, results in three different types of emotional disturbances. But all three emotional disturbances, depression, anxiety, and then a going back and forth between the two, all three emotional disturbances result in self-imposed starvation. Type 3 of possession. Another type of distortion is seen in the fear of or desire for, quote, spirit possession. The fear of or desire for spirit possession. Now, the term spirit here, in this case, is profoundly debased in this context. But the term spirit possession, the fear of it or the desire for it, does entail a recognition that the body is not enough and investing the body with magic won't work. So when it comes to fear of or desire for spirit possession at least acknowledges that possession relative to the body doesn't work. It's not enough. This recognition that investing the body with magic won't work accepts the fact that neither type 1 nor type 2 of possession wanting to be possessing or wanting to be possessed is sufficient, but precisely because it does not limit fear so narrowly, it's more likely to produce greater fear in its own right. Endowing the spirit with human possessiveness is a more inclusive error than type 1 or type 2, and endowing the spirit with human possessiveness is a step somewhat further away from the right mind. Projection is also more likely to occur, with vacillations between grandiosity and fear. This possibly refers to projecting your own possessiveness onto the spirit realm so that the spirit appears to either want you as its prized possession, the source of your grandiosity, or the spirit wants to possessively control you, the source of your fear. Religion, in a distorted sense, is also more likely to occur in this kind of error, spirit possession error, because the idea of a, quote, spirit is introduced, though fallaciously, while the idea of spirit is excluded from type 1 and type 2 of possession. Now, witchcraft is thus particularly apt to be associated with type 3, spirit possession, because of the much greater investment in magic. When it comes to the desire for or the fear of spirit possession, in comes the idea of witchcraft, because that type of error has a greater investment in magic. You got 3 types of error here. You got the desire to possess. That's the first type of error of possession. The second error of possession is desire to be possessed. And the third error of possession is the desire or fear of spirit possession. And the third type of error, spirit possession, is where religion comes in, and also witchcraft. Now, it should be noted that the type 1 error of possession, desire to possess, involves only the body. The second error around possession, desire to be possessed, involves an attempt to associate things with human attributes. And the type 3 error around possession, on the other hand, is a more serious level confusion because it endows the spirit with evil attributes. And endowing the spirit with evil attributes, well, that accounts both for the religious zeal of its proponents and also the aversion or fear of its opponents. Both attitudes stem from the same false belief. And this is not what the Bible means by, quote, filled with the Holy Spirit. That is not what is meant by that. The concept of, quote, speaking in many tongues was originally an injunction to communicate to everyone in their own language or at their own level. It hardly meant to speak in a way that nobody could understand. This strange error occurs when people do understand the need for universal communication, but have contaminated it with the possession fallacy. The fear engendered by this misperception leads to a conflicted state in which communication is attempted, but the fear is allayed by making the communication incomprehensible. This probably means that those speaking in tongues want to let the Spirit speak through them, but also fear the Spirit speaking through them because they think the Spirit is possessive in the usual negative sense. And so these folks let Spirit through, but then cut down on the communication and thereby reduce the communication threat to them by making the communication incomprehensible. It could also be said that the fear of letting Spirit communicate through you induces selfishness or regression, because incomprehensible communication is hardly a worthy offering from one child of God to another. Type 4 error related to possession. Knowledge can also be misinterpreted as a means of possession. Hence, here the content is not physical, and the underlying fallacy is more likely to be the confusion of mind and brain. Now, this seems to mean that the, quote, confusion of mind and brain, unquote, which means seeing the non-physical mind as being the physical brain, is the underlying basis for treating non-physical knowledge as a physical possession, which can be privately owned. So the desire to possess knowledge. The confusion of mind and brain, that to the desire to possess knowledge is confusing the brain and the mind. The attempt to unite non-physical content with physical attributes is illustrated by statements like, quote, the thirst for knowledge. Well, this is not what thirst in the Bible means. The term thirst was used only because of humanity's limited comprehension and is probably better dropped. Some references to thirst are better dropped, probably better dropped. Now, the fallacious use of knowledge can result in several errors. The first fallacious use of knowledge is 1. The idea that knowledge will make the individual more attractive to others. This is a possession fallacy. I want to possess knowledge because it will make me more attractive to others. Well, that's a possession error. And this is a type 1 possession error, because knowledge has now become a means of possessing others. When you say, I want to possess knowledge so I am more attractive to others, is a type 1 possession error where you desire to possess others. Number 2, the second fallacious use of knowledge is this: the idea that knowledge will make the individual invulnerable. Knowledge is power. If you have knowledge, you'll be invulnerable. Well, this is a reaction formation against the underlying fear of vulnerability. You're just afraid of being vulnerable. You have an underlying fear of being vulnerable, and a reaction formation is knowledge is power. Knowledge will make me invulnerable. And the third error, the third fallacious use of knowledge is this: the idea that knowledge will make the individual worthy. Well, this is largely pathetic. That is the fallacious use of knowledge. That is the 3 types of the errors of the possession of knowledge, the desire to possess knowledge. Right, so that was The fourth error related to possession was the possession of knowledge. Well, like all of these fallacies, type 4, the possession of knowledge for all the wrong reasons, contains a denial mechanism which swings into operation as the fear increases, thus canceling out the error temporarily but seriously impairing efficiency. For example, one person might claim that she cannot read, while another person might claim he cannot speak. This originally referred to Helen's reading phobia and Bill's public speaking phobia. For example, one person might claim she cannot read, while another person claims he cannot speak. Note that depression is a real risk here, because a child of God should never reduce his efficiency in any way. The depression comes from a peculiar pseudo-solution which reads, "A child of God is efficient. I am not efficient, therefore I am not a child of God. I'm not good at this, and a child of God would be good at this, so I must not be a child of God," is what produces it produces depression. Depression comes from a peculiar pseudo-solution to this mistake. A child of God is efficient. I'm not efficient, therefore I'm not a child of God. Depression comes from that pseudo-solution. And that leads to neurotic resignation. And neurotic resignation is a state which merely increases the depression. The corresponding denial mechanism for type 1 is physical inability or impotence. The corresponding denial mechanism for type 1 possession error, the desire to possess, the denial mechanism for your own desire to possess is physical inability or physical impotence. The denial mechanism for type 2 error, which is the desire to be possessed, is often bankruptcy. The desire to be possessed often leads to the denial mechanism for the desire to be possessed is to be bankrupt. Collectors of things often drive themselves well beyond their financial means in an attempt to force discontinuance. In other words, if you have a desire to be possessed, then very often you will engage a mechanism to shut that down by driving yourself well beyond your financial means to force yourself to not be able to be possessed by things. There's a desire to possess others. There's also a desire to be possessed. When you have a desire to be possessed, typically you are possessed by your desire for things, and you become a collector of things, a collector of people. And in a denial mechanism that you put into place to make sure that doesn't happen is you go bankrupt so that you can no longer collect things and thereby possess things or be possessed by your desire for things or people. Now, if this idea of going bankrupt so that you can't possess anything else can't be tolerated, then a strange compromising involving both insatiable possessiveness and insatiable throwing away may result. Wow. if you can't tolerate the idea of collecting people or things to possess or be possessed by, if you can't tolerate the idea of stopping the collecting by going bankrupt, then something you might do as a compromise approach is to as a reaction formation is to have an insatiable need to throw things away, aka bankruptcy. All right, now an example is the inveterate or compulsive gambler, particularly the horse racing addict or the sex addict. Here, the conflicted drive is displaced both from people and things, and then is invested in animals. So this example is the inveterate or compulsive gambler, particularly the horse racing addict. Here, in the horse racing addict, the conflicted drive is displaced both from people and things, and then is invested in animals. The implied derogation of people is the cause of the underlying extreme superstition of the horse racing addict. In other words, the horse racing addict's focus on horses is at root a denial, a denigration of the addiction to people. Having denigrated others, the horse racing gambler now apparently believes that there are forces out there that will denigrate him, forces that must be magically controlled through superstitious means. The alcoholic is in a similar position, except that the alcoholic's hostility is more inward than outward directed. In other words, whereas the horse racing addict denigrates other people, the alcoholic denigrates himself. Defenses aimed at protecting or retaining errors are particularly hard to undo, because they introduce second-order misperceptions which obscure the underlying errors still further. And this seems to refer particularly to the strange compromises that arise when you cannot tolerate the cessation of the error, and so you pour your energy into both continuing the error and forcing a discontinuance of the error, as the compulsive gambler does. The pseudo-corrective mechanisms for type 3 error is apt to be more varied because of the more inclusive nature of the error, which has already been mentioned. Some of the possibilities are listed below. One of the possibilities of the error is this. One aspect of the possession-possessed conflict can be raised to predominance. If this is attempted in connection with possessing, it leads to the paranoid solution. Our understanding of this difficult sentence is as follows. You have begun to fear your desire for spirit possession. And so the denial mechanism, your fear of it, kicks in, and then you try to force discontinuance of your fear and desire for spirit possession. And you do this, you try to force the stopping of your fear or desire for spirit possession by denying one side of the desire. In this first case, you deny the desire to be possessed by spirits, or the spirit, And then you focus instead on possessing spirits or the spirit, perhaps using witchcraft to try to control spirits for your benefit, or using manipulative forms of prayer to control the spirit. Yet being so possessive is frightening and thus produces its own stress. To relieve this stress, then you employ the, quote, paranoid solution, where you project your possessiveness and then see your possessiveness outside of you in spirits or in the spirit, attempting to possess and persecute you. This paranoia seems like a solution because it relieves the stress of seeing a destructive possessiveness within yourself. The underlying component of, quote, being possessed is retained in the so-called persecution fantasies, which generally accompany the paranoia. I am afraid of being possessed. I desire to be possessed. I'm afraid of being possessed, but I want to deny that. So now I project that possessiveness out, and I believe that, and I become paranoid, believing that the spirit wants to possess me. Now, if, quote, being possessed, unquote, is brought to ascendance, then a state of some sort of possession by external forces results, but not with a major emphasis on attacking others. Attack by others becomes the more obvious component now. In an attack on others, attack on others is emphasized in the first one, while in the second one, attack by others is emphasized. In the more virulent forms of the idea of being possessed, there is a sense of being possessed by demons. And unless this vacillates with the other one, the first one, a catatonic solution is more likely than a paranoid one. Whereas the person in the first error opts for the paranoid solution, which means seeing possessiveness outside of them to solve the stress induced by their own inner possessiveness, the person in the second one feels so beset by outside forces, including perhaps possessive demons, that he opts for the so-called catatonic solution to solve the stress of seeing demons as trying to possess him. He becomes catatonic, which often happens in cases of supposed demon possession. In that first type of error, the desire to possess or be possessed, it produces projection of the possession in order to reduce the stress. It produces either the paranoid solution or the catatonic solution to the idea of the desire or the fear of being possessed. The focused paranoid has become more rigid in his solution and centers on one source of projection to escape from vacillation. It should be noted that this type of paranoia is an upside-down form of religion because of its obvious attempt to unify into oneness. In other words, by projecting the person's possessiveness onto a single place, presumably a spirit or the spirit, which then becomes a single source of fear, the focused paranoid is expressing an upside-down form of the religious impulse, which concentrates one's love and devotion on a single object, God. This focused paranoia is a more rigid solution which helps the person keep from vacillating between A and B, the first and the second type. Types 1, 2, and 4 relative to possession are more likely to produce neurotic rather than psychotic states. Type 1, which is the desire or fear of the desire to be possessed. Type 2, the desire to possess. And type 4, the possession, the desire to possess knowledge. They are more likely to produce neurotic rather than psychotic states, though this is by no means guaranteed. However, type 3, the desire or the fear of being possessed by spirit or the spirit, is inherently more vulnerable to psychosis, again, because of the more fundamental level confusion between brain and spirit which is involved. The level confusion here is the spirit and also evil. That's the level confusion there. It should be noted that the greater fear which is induced by type 3 can itself reach psychotic proportions, thus forcing the individual closer and closer to a psychotic solution. The so-called psychotic solution attempts to solve fear or stress by giving up consensual reality, i.e., going into psychosis. It is emphasized here that these differences have no effect at all on the miracle, which can heal any of them with equal ease. And this is because of the miracle's inherent avoidance of within-error distinctions. The miracle's inherent avoidance of within-error distinctions. This is one error, and all the distinctions within that one error, the miracle avoids. Avoids the inherent within-error distinctions. It's all an error. The miracle's sole concern is to distinguish between truth on the one hand and all kinds of errors on the other hand. And this is why some miracles seem to be of greater magnitude than others. But remember the first principle in this course, that there is no order of difficulty in miracles. The first principle of miracles is that there is no order of difficulty among or within miracles or errors. The miracle's sole concern is to distinguish between truth on the one hand and all kinds of error on the other hand. And this is why some miracles seem to be of greater magnitude than others. But remember the first principle in this course, that there is no order of difficulty in miracles. The emphasis on mental illness, which is marked in these notes, reflects the undoing aspect of the miracle. The emphasis on mental illness, which is marked in these notes, reflects the undoing aspect of the miracle. The doing aspect of the miracle is, of course, much more important, but a true miracle cannot occur on a false basis. Sometimes the undoing must precede the miracle. At other times, both can occur simultaneously, but you are not up to this at this moment. Further insights into mental illness can be misused and can lead to preoccupation with one's own symptoms. Further insights into mental illness can be misused and can lead to preoccupation with one's own symptoms. This is why this area is less constructive for most people than a course primarily devoted to mental health. However, some professions will find some principles of mental illness constructive. So what we just read about and heard about were principles of mental illness. It says some professions, however, will find some principles, will find courses primarily devoted to mental health more suited to them. But some professions will find some principles of mental illness constructive, especially those professions which are concerned with mental illness in others. This obviously includes psychologists. The obvious correction for all types of the possession fallacy is to redefine possession correctly, in the sense of, quote, taking over. The concept does not exist at all in divine reality, which is the only level where real existence is a meaningful term. The only level where taking over is meaningful is on the level of the divine reality. No one can be taken over unless they will to be. However, if you place your mind under tyranny rather than true authority,